Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear, of course, in the poetry discussion playlist here on the channel. Today's poem, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer by Walt Whitman, and it reads as such. Now, the line breaks are going to be absolutely jacked here because Walt Whitman did not care for line breaks. So I had to fit this on here and in a readable manner, so I apologize in advance. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out I wandered off by myself in the mystical moist night air, and from time to time looked up in a perfect silence at the stars. So, what are we doing here with this poem? I don't know why this is an entire empty page there, but what are we doing here with this poem? We are taking a step back from intellectualism towards nature. In essence, that's so one of the great things that Walt Whitman was able to do was really boil down his philosophy into moments, right? So we've talked, I talked recently on the channel about Robert Frost and how Robert Frost would find poetry, much the same as Charles Bukowski would find poetry in real life. He would go through a day and pick out some moment that had some micro irony in it, and all of a sudden you tease that out a bit and you have a poem. Do I believe that Walt Whitman actually sat in class with an astronomer and there was a moment where he went outside because he was fed up and looked at the No, I don't really believe that. I mean, maybe he did this. This is not the genesis of the poem. The poem would have come later because that's just the way Walt Whitman writes. Maybe it's true, right? I don't know for sure. I just don't believe it. But it is ultra truth, right? It is what we need in order to understand that little bit of philosophy from Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman, whose poems are written in a way as to make you believe they are anti-philosophical, almost. He's daring you to over-intellectualize this poem because the point of this poem is not to intellectualize things. Now, a little while ago, there was an Emily Dickinson poem for which we used this from Wikipedia, but I want to go through this again and sort of envision this poem when we're reading about transcendentalism, the definition of transcendentalism. Transcendentalism is a philosophical, spiritual, and literary movement that developed in the late 1820s and 1830s in the New England region of the United States. A core belief is in the inherent goodness of people and nature. And while society and its institutions have corrupted the purity of the individual, people are at their best when truly self-reliant and independent. Everything right there is Walt Whitman. Transcendentalists saw divine experience inherent in the everyday, just like this poem, rather than believing in a distant heaven. Transcendentalists saw physical and spiritual phenomena as part of dynamic processes rather than discrete entities. Transcendentalism is one of the first philosophical currents that emerged in the United States. Walt Whitman is quintessentially an American poet. It is therefore a key early point in the history of American philosophy, emphasizing subjective intuition. I go outside and look at the stars over objective empiricism. The astronomer had told me all of the math. Its adherents believe that individuals are capable of generating completely original insights with little attention to and deference to past transcendentalists. So, I mean, this goes back to the sort of idea of where are we at here? People are at their best when they are self reliant and independent. Transcendentalists are at their best when they don't have to rely on past transcendentalists. Its rise was a protest against the general state of intellectualism and spirituality at the time. The doctrine of the Unitarian Church, as taught at Harvard Divinity School, was closely related. Transcendentalism emerged from English and German Romanticism, the biblical criticisms of Johann Gottfried Herder and Friedrich Schleiermacher, the skepticism of David Hume, and the transcendental philosophy of Immanuel Kant and German idealism. Perry Miller and Arthur Versluis regard Emanuel Swedenborg and Jacob Boehme as pervasive influences on transcendentalism. So everything we read there about this disregard for the intellectual, learned intellectual, and an embrace of perfect silence at the stars, just the spiritual moment from the individual, and that individual's connection to nature overrides all of the intellectual stuff that they could have going on. Now, I also said down here Stephen King. Ooh, messed everything up there. There is a very good quote from Stephen King in Danse Macabre. He gives us the opening paragraph for House on Haunted Hill, or The Haunting of Hill House, pardon me. And it reads as such: no live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House. Whatever walked there, walked alone. Of this paragraph, Stephen King says, I think there are few, if any, descriptive paragraphs in the entire English language that are any finer than this. It is the sort of quiet epiphany every writer hopes for. Words that somehow transcend words, words which add up to a total greater than the sum of the parts. Analysis of a paragraph is a mean and shoddy trick, and should almost always be left to college and university professors, those lepidopterists of literature who, when they see a lovely butterfly, feel that they should immediately run into the field with a net, catch it, kill it, put a drop of chloroform on it, mount it on a whiteboard, and put it behind a glass case where it will be still beautiful, just as dead as horse manure. That is the sort of argument that Walt Whitman is making here as well. That what we have done with all of nature, not just with literature, with all of nature, is we have over-intellectualized it. We have caught it with a net, dropped some chloroform on it, put some needles through it to stick it to the board, and put it behind a pane of glass. It is no longer literature. It is the in order to dissect, we must first kill. Nature, if we are intellectualizing it in that way, is not alive. It is dead. We have killed it. Literature, if we're intellectualizing it in that way, is no longer alive. It is dead. We have killed it. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, so consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more literary discussions in the future. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.